welcome you to this session today, which is Living Wages, Advancing Equity in Our Organizations. And our presenters are Joanne Alcantara and Diane Alcantara-Thompson. But we are going to stop sharing our screen. And Joanne and Diane, I'd love to invite you to introduce yourselves.
Great. I'm going to take over the screen share now too.
Great. So my name is Joanne Alcantara. I'm the former executive director for API Chaya. And API Chaya, for folks that don't know, is an organization based in Seattle, Washington. It's a culturally specific anti-violence organization that's been around for over 25 years. And it serves South Asian, and Pacific Islander organizations. And half of the organization is based in advocacy and direct services. So we provide therapy, we provide the housing support, all those typical supports. And then the other half of the organization is based in education and community organizing. So I think that's something that's a little bit different about the program and the way that we look at the work. For myself, I am somebody who is an immigrant. I was born in the Philippines. I use she, her pronouns. I was born to a Chinese mama and Filipino papa, and our family moved to the Seattle area when I was a child. So I was raised here in Seattle, got my education on the East Coast, and then came back to Seattle to be part of this organization as a young person, and then took a break and came back in 2016 as the executive director. And I hand that over to Diane.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Diane Alcantara-Thompson, and as Joanne and I are probably related, but we don't actually know how. We don't have that history, so that's a question we get a lot. But I came to work at API Chaya, and I was a community member for about 15 years beforehand, and had actually heard about some really groundbreaking work that Joanne, and community organizing project that Joanne was leading, and was so excited about it because I had been volunteering and working in domestic violence shelters and felt like the context that I was doing that in was really separate from my upbringing in a Filipino and Chamorro household. And was really excited to hear about this queer people of color liberation project. So that's how I got involved with API Chaya. And I think in a lot of ways was able to stay in the movement in the field. I grew up in a pretty abusive household, and I think was really concerned that maybe I had to separate from my community in order to do this kind of work. So finding API Chaya, and particularly the queer People of Color Liberation Project, was a big deal for me. And it also was a place for me as a mixed person who mostly people identify as white, but I wasn't raised, in white community, to kind of figure out what does it mean to walk in the world with a lot of privilege, and also not having that background. So I identify as a survivor of all different kinds of violence, but I think that getting to do the work in my community and with the values of transformative justice and that we can do it was really exciting and helpful to me. And currently at API Chaya, I'm a community organizing manager, and we have a couple of folks that I get to work on things like language access, working on getting free internet to everybody in the community. And then we also have somebody that works on the rape prevention education, the RPE grant. So, and a couple of other things, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to these days. And I wanted to actually have us start by just taking a minute to see about just trying to get grounded in our bodies. So if if you are seated, that's fine. Or if you're standing, that's great. But just take a second to try to be a little bit more comfortable. So I'm going to pause. And maybe while you're doing that, you might take a deep breath. And while we're doing that, I'd love for people to think about, the land that you're on. Joanne and I are on the Duwamish land here in Seattle, and they always ask that people make sure to just recognize them and honor them. And I know that that's something that's common for communities, Indigenous communities all across the world. I know I have a sister in the movement that's trying to be on these calls, like out in American Samoa. So, wherever you are, just take a second to ground yourself. Maybe take one more breath. And then, I know this is true for Joanne and I know this is true for lots of people all over the world as we are in a pandemic right now, that, this has been a really tough period, that we've lost people, that people have been sick, people have been struggling. And we don't have to check that out the door, that our work looks at that for so many people, and we can look at that for ourselves too. So we'll just take maybe another minute of just sitting together and being with whatever is, and then we'll move on to a more traditional workshop. If you haven't had a chance to get water or anything else you need, go ahead and do that. Okay. I'm going to bring people back and just let folks know. We're going to be using Jamboard in this workshop, and Jamboard is actually a thing. I think I heard the words first from Mo, but it's just a way to have some interaction. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. And we did some work to try to make it, hopefully you all can see it. But the first slide is, what do you hope to get out of this workshop in particular? And you can use the way that Jamboard works. You can kind of click on, like, this, for example, will pop up, and you can use a Post-it kind of thing. You can do different drawings or stuff like that here. But just adding in, like, what are you hoping for from today's session? And that can be, one of the things I think so often we come to these workshops, we see a workshop title like living wages, and we're like, oh, I want everybody to have living wages in my organization. Like, how do I do that? And I think it's really hard to come to something and have the idea that they're going to tell me exactly what I need to do in order to get this thing. That's really important. And I think there's something about, like, remembering, like, we can get out of, we're here today to talk about the story and, the experiences and the ideas that we have coming from API Chaya. I'm so excited for folks to get to hear about this. I wasn't working at API Chaya when this work happened, and I'm so glad to be here now. But I remember talking about it with Joanne, and I think that's really exciting. But you're not going to be able to, like, pick up what we've done and, like, lay it over your organization. You're going to have to figure out what makes sense, and you'll only be able to get as much out of the information that we share today as you're able to put in, right? And so I think it's really important just to kind of ground again in what are your hopes, and yeah, what are you hoping to take away? Cool. Great. So seeing advice for my organization, learning something new. Great. To add more tools to my toolbox. Excellent. And for those of you who haven't done Jamboard, this is kind of what it looks like. How to convince member programs to reassess their budget and pay their employees livable wages. Great. Great. Well, I think you're in exactly the right place. These are exactly the kinds of conversations we're going to be having today. And, you know, I think for us, when we started to talk about this, we really see it as a values issue, you know, and like so I was curious, sort of on the next slide and the next page in the Jamboard is, what are the values you use to guide your life? So again, if you're in the Jamboard, we were on this slide, and then we're going just to fast forward to this one. And then if folks want to start adding there. And I wanted to offer this list that kind of talks about, this is from Brene Brown. So, you know, Brene Brown is a researcher, and I think, you know, became kind of famous talking about like shame, actually. And sometimes it's hard for me to remember what, as soon as I say the word shame, like what are the positive things. But, you know, like she also ended up doing a lot of research around like resiliency, because, and like thinking through, you know, what is it that we really value, that we really want to see in the world. So that's a list of some different values. And I'm just curious if folks could kind of share, like, what are the values that guide your life? How do you think about, and you know, as I've recently become a manager, and I've been trying to listen to a lot of the work that Brene Brown has done about leadership. And one of the things that she talks about is it's really important to just actually is to pick and to think about two values, as difficult as that is. But what, you know, we could, that basically, like, as far as some of the brain research goes, it looks like that's kind of like what folks can do. So what are the top two values that you have, that you operate from your life? And in listening to Brene Brown, she said something that I thought was really shocking. I think as a person who's done, you know, is a survivor and has worked in this field and recognizes the value of like compartmentalizing, she said something about how actually like you can't go from like home to work and switch your values. That really, there's not like that kind of separation like isn't totally possible for humans. But I think the way that we can think about it is like, we get to have values that we are led by in our life. And then our organizations are also have a set of values, right? So what are the values that your organization, the question on the Jamboard, the next one is values that guide your work or organization. And
Diane, just as a little pause here, I think, you know, the values that people put up on this board are really beautiful. I'm seeing love, respect, empathy, kindness, learning, justice, care for community, a lot of compassion, equity. You know, I think as a movement, there are a lot of people who come into this work from a really heart-centered place, and just want to lift that up.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm curious, like, how do we see that operationalized in our organization? Like, how do we see that coming across? So if folks could move to the next Jamboard, what are the values that guide your work or organization? Social justice, empowerment, grace for mistakes and imperfection. It's great.
And seeing
Trust.
healing, survivor-centered, care for survivors. The bottom line, diversity, inclusion, transparency.
That's great. Thank you all so much. So, let's see. So the last like tool from Brene Brown I wanted to offer is actually this idea of a permission slip. And basically, you know, I think, I don't know, it's been so great being here for this conference and kind of like hearing all of this amazing work. And I think just the idea that violence that happens to like so many people, like we're actually trying to think about like, how do we shift culture to prevent that kind of violence, right? So we're taking on big things all the time. And I think this issue of like pay equity and thinking about like, how can we make this movement a place that people can be for their lives and be able to support their families is really important and huge piece, right? So I kind of want to offer this idea of like taking a minute to just like write yourself a permission slip to get to think about this and to get to take this on. I think that this was something that I saw was really important for the journey at API Chaya, and I want to encourage you all to do that. So it's on page 5 of the link that I just sent. But really the idea is just, what do you need to give yourself permission to do, feel, or not to do to show up for this? And so, you know, maybe the permission slip is just, I'm going to make a commitment to get to think about this, to carve out a half an hour every week, or I'm going to talk to my board about it, or whatever that is. But, you know, we're going to talk more about action steps. But I wonder if just for a minute, you could kind of think through, I'll give you like 30 seconds to just write something down. What's the permission slip you need for this? I'm going to pass it to you, Joanne.
Okay, thank you. Our next slide is just about affirming. You know, life is really complicated. You know, we've named all of these amazing values that we hold personally, that our organizations hold, you know, part of, I think, what happens in life is that there's often can be a tension of values. And I found, you know, as somebody who is a first-time executive director at API Chaya, that in my role in leadership, I was looking at, you know, how do I honor our advocates and our staff? How do we increase our impact as an organization? How do I do the best that I can with our budget? And, you know, all of those things are kind of in tension as we move forward. And I think for most people, whether you're a board member or a funder or a staff person or a leader at your organization, those things are always kind of in play. I'm kind of coming here with the assumption and affirmation that most organizations want to pay people more and most organizations want to create good jobs, but there's a kind of puzzle that we haven't been able to crack yet as a movement about how to do that. You know, when I came into my role and into my work at API Chaya, one of the questions that we were asking ourselves, and I want to invite you know, us to ask as a movement, is how do we recenter our work in a place that is about employing single working parents sustainably? Because the value that we wanted to move forward was as an organization that's full of survivors, I identify as a survivor. Diane shared too. And I'm, a lot of people working at our organizations identify as survivors. Many have fled domestic violence. We wanted to create a community and a work environment where it was possible for a single working parent to be able to be sustaining their family through a job at our organization. And the bar that we set for ourselves was, what if a parent has 2 children and they are, school aged? How can we create a living standard within our organization that could support them? And yeah, I think, as we thought about that, one of the questions, or we had a lot of questions about that. And, we want to invite you now to just kind of share with us, what do you think gets in the way for your organizations? For those of you who are looking for more tools, who feel like your organizations are struggling with this issue, or the movement is struggling with this issue, what do you think is getting in the way? And in the chat, someone just mentioned, it's all the more important when you're in a super high cost of living area like Seattle, and that is real. It is really expensive to live here. Housing is really expensive. It's, it takes a lot of resources and community to make life happen here. And Diane, if you could go ahead and get us to the Jamboard, we've got a question there for everybody. And Ashley, could you do the link again to the Jamboard for everybody? Someone shared in the chat, upper management gets a big piece of the pie, and I want to affirm that. I think traditionally when people look at nonprofit budgets and salaries, and there's this assumption that that the folks in management are gonna take a big slice, and that the frontline staff are gonna have to be at competitive social work wages, which are often pretty low. Thank you, Ashley. So the Jamboard is up, and let me get my head around it. So I'm seeing status quo as part of the challenges, local government, imposter syndrome, super high cost of living, the movement's martyrdom mindset, that's really real, funding from government, outdated beliefs, a belief that nonprofit means low salaries. Yeah, I think there's a lot of barriers, and a lot of them are rooted in our belief systems about what do people deserve who work in this industry, in social work. And so part of the shift that we want to make with all of us together in this movement is to say, hey, we all deserve more. We deserve to be able to care for ourselves, care for our families, while we move forward this really important work to end violence. And that economic violence is real. Economic violence is part of what happens to survivors when they're stuck in low-wage work. Diane, is there anything that you want to add here?
I think just that I've had a lot of conversations with other executive directors and with other people in leadership, and I think these are just really hard conversations. So I just want to honor that we're really conceptualizing and thinking about this as like a start in some ways to being able to have open conversations. I've had pretty heated conversations with people that I really love and care about. And I think that this idea, that Joanne shared about just, we know that people want to be able to pay people more, and it feels like one of those things that's impossible. And we're also in a field that's trying to do it impossible, that also feels impossible. So I think it feels like kind of a mirror in that way. That's all.
Thank you. I think we can go to the next slide.
Okay. So I think I'm going to stop sharing screen for a minute and just invite people to take this poll. So, does your organization sustainably employ single working parents?
Oh, it started half and half, but we're getting more no's. Oh.
And yeah, I'm curious too, you know, if folks want to, I think maybe the question should have been just like, do you have a lot of single working parents at your organization, you know, and have they been there for a long time? So it's pretty half and half. Yeah.
And I just want to lift up in the chat, Katie is saying, I just feel like we can't provide the best services to survivors if we can't even be paid properly. If an org has a revolving door, think about how that impacts the population we serve. And that was part of what we were thinking about too. You know, we have, at the time that I started leading the organization, we had an advocate on our team who was our most senior advocate, who'd been there for about 15 years, but that whole time was working 2 jobs. And as we were growing the organization, you know, we were definitely seeing people come and go. A lot of people didn't feel like they could last that long at an organization like ours because they felt like they needed to make more money in order to support their families as they went on in their life and in their career. Thank you so much for taking the poll. It's good to see that there are some places where many places where it seems like folks are feeling like they're well sustained. My Zoom just dropped, but hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, we can still hear you, Joanne.
Thanks.
I wanted to move us into another poll. So I'm going to end this one, but we ended up at about 57 people saying yes and 48 people saying no. And we're going to do another question. So what is the salary range of your organization for direct service staff? And we're doing this knowing that, you know, these numbers mean different things in different places. But we did want to go ahead and just kind of get a sense. So I'm going to go back to sharing screen just so you can see how it's looking.
Thanks, Diane. And my screen is back, but if folks could make me a co-host again and give me all the permissions, that would be great.
Okay. So I'm going to end the poll for now, but this is about, you know, it looks like mostly folks are in the 30 to 40K a year. Some people, you know, 60, a couple of folks below 20.
I'm seeing in the chat too, folks saying, you know, honestly, with a graduate degree and working in social services, I'm still grossly underpaid. And, you know, I think in our organization, we came from a place of valuing both kind of the experience that was learned on the job and the experience of folks coming in with graduate degrees. And we wanted to create, you know, some equity there around, you know, it's hard for some populations, especially folks of color and immigrant folks to access higher education oftentimes. And we wanted to be a place where community members were able to come in as volunteers, learn about our organization, you know, have internship opportunities, and then become staff and gain their skills in that way. And, I'm seeing from people in every part of the country. Of course, the cost of living is different. The standards are a little bit different, but thank you so much for participating. Oh, excuse me, participating in this. I'm seeing a lot of the salaries falling, 40K or under, and then, yeah, some percentage going higher than that. And I'm can feel the frustration. It's hard not to see your faces, but I see it in the chat. Thank you. And it is really complicated. The funding puzzle is really complicated for keeping our organizations afloat. And then on top of that, trying to ensure that we're doing the right thing for our staff. I think we can go ahead and close the poll. Thank you so much. I wanted to be able to just share with you all, a little bit of how API Chaya got to where we were able to. It's not perfect, but we were able to accomplish a lot in the last 5 or 6 years, and there's a certain backdrop to that. So as I shared, API Chaya is an organization that is over 25 years old. It is an organization that was formed by the merger of 2 separate community-based organizations. And they merged partly because their funding models alone were not working sustainably, right? So one organization was mostly based in government grants, and the other organization mostly had their budgets determined by individual giving and direct fundraising campaigns. And both were finding that it was unstable to just rely on one or the other. And when the organizations merged, this was the API Women and Family Safety Center and Chaya, it created a more stable funding model. So when I came into the organization, I had that as part of my backdrop, which was very helpful, that we had about 25% of our budget then from individual donors, and then more than 2/3 from the government grants and contracts. We also were presented with a really unusual opportunity at the time, which the state had a grant program from as a pass-through from the federal government for VOCA, VOCA wage increases, and they called it like the VOCA compensation grant. And so they were looking for organizations to apply just so that their staff could get paid better. And what an amazing time to join an organization, and an amazing opportunity for us to apply. One of the things that we found, though, was that they only wanted to pay advocates more. They didn't have the resource or the criteria to pay organizers more. And for us, that was a big value conversation and tension in our team, because were we willing at the time to pay half of our staff more because we could, and then have the others come later, or how could we solve this problem so that we could all get to a better place together. We also had we're facing a really high cost of living in King County. At the time that I was doing my own research, the median income in our area was $80,000, and nobody was making that at our agency. That was just out of range. Not even executive management staff was close to that. And then as our team was thinking about this and trying to respond to this grant opportunity and trying to come up with the numbers, one of the things that the staff and our management team looked at was kind of centering this hypothetical survivor, which we talked about before. A person who is a single parent with 2 children that are school aged. And I just want to put a little poke in here that we weren't thinking about somebody who had a baby, who might have more full-time care needed. We were thinking about someone who might need after-school care, something like that for their kids. And, we were thinking about modest someone who could live modestly with their children. And, you know, from kind of this place is where we started to build our staffing and compensation scale. And I do want to, you know, give a shout out to WSCDIV, the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I was served on their board for a short time, and they had a staffing scale that, you know, I thought about when I came into this leadership position. How could an advocate, how could an office manager, you know, how could a program manager be able to think about their long-term future at the agency, and what numbers were we going to plug into that scale for someone, you know, who's entry level versus someone who is experienced. And then, you know, that organization also had the policy of doing a cost of living increase every year. So how could the whole scale bump up by, you know, some percent every year? And that's, you know, that's where we started. That's what we built. And part of what we decided was, you know, we couldn't pay half of our team more than another side of our team. So part of why I wanted to lift up the funding structures, we did have enough individual donations. We had enough room from our foundation partners. And then we had enough understanding from some of our other funders to be able to really just push our numbers and our money around so that we could get the whole team up by a certain level. And what we were able to accomplish in the first year was, you know, a significant bump towards living wages. We set our median point at 58,000, and from there, that was the number that we came up with was, you know, what it would cost a single person with those 2 kids to live in our area, and we based our whole salary scale from that number. So for that marker on our scale, it was, you know, for someone who's been with us for maybe 3 to 5 years as an advocate, and it would be, you know, some percentage lower for someone who's brand new, some percentage higher for someone who's more experienced. And for us, we built 20 steps on our scale. So, you know, at the end of it, a person who has served as an advocate for 20 years could possibly make more than an entry-level manager. And, you know, that was part of us really wanting to value longevity, really wanting to value, you know, that some people are just amazing advocates and organizers and would never want to be managers. And that's like, you know, it's a perfect fit for them to stay where they are at. But we all deserve to be able to live in conditions that really support us. I think Diane, you know, when we were prepping for this, part of what she was hoping that I would share too was, you know, I come from a partnership with a union electrician. So my wife has been in the union for 2 decades now. And, you know, that really influenced how I was thinking about this too, is that, you know, our family has been able to weather a lot of storms because we had a living wage from my wife. We had health care for our whole family. And that was something, you know, that, yeah, we never really had to worry about. And that we have the security of a retirement for our future. I'm seeing folks loving the idea of a self-care budget. So that's not something we accomplished in year 1, but this list is the list of things we were able to accomplish within 4 to 5 years. And some of this was also because of really great advocacy at the state and at the city and at the county, that, you know, there were these wage increases that were demanded by organizers and by workers to have a higher standard of living where we are. And, you know, family medical leave, short-term disability, those were things that the state of Washington also pitched in on for everybody in our area. So some of these things we did, you know, as an agency, some of these things we're able to accomplish through the advocacy of a lot of others in our state. The self-care budget, that was us.
Joanne.
Yeah, Diane, do you want to add anything here?
I wondered, actually, we got a question in the chat about the difference between family medical leave and parental leave, if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So, I think, those are pretty similar, but family medical leave is broader. So there are other times when, there might be a need for somebody to care for an elder, or a need for somebody to care for themselves because of an injury. So I think there's just kind of several layers here. I'm hearing too kind of this comment around a merit raise versus cost of living. And, as kind of a values point, when we started this, the director before me, just kind of made it clear to everybody, including our board, that we were not going to do merit increases. And that was a standard that she set. And part of that was about, just really valuing people's experience. And if we were feeling like somebody was not performing, instead of saying, you can go on and you can keep getting paid here, that we would just have a difficult conversation with them to say, hey, this isn't working. That was something that I learned in my first year too, was kind of just thinking that through. But I'm sure there's a lot of folks in HR who might have, some different stories or some experiences around that. But in our experience, I think having just a regular cost of living and an annual, or for us, every 2 years, a bump, gave people a lot of hope for being able to stay in this work. I think we have like a record number of babies on staff right now, of people feeling like they can have a family and stay with this movement. I think that's been really huge. Someone asked about minimum annual leave, sick leave, personal mental health days. For our agency, we started at a place where it was really low wage work. That is, I think, an honest place to be. And the way that the organization did compensate the team was to provide a lot of leave, was to say, hey, we understand we're not paying a lot, but we love you and care about you, and how we're going to show that is by giving a lot of leave. So, we are at kind of a nice place right now where the salaries have been bumped, and folks do get a few weeks off every week or every year, depending on how long they've been with the agency. Thanks, Diane. So we're continuing to prioritize, more areas of our work that we haven't totally figured out. So paid parental leave, medical leave, and other family leave. The state is providing a lot of that. API Chaya is still struggling to provide paid healthcare coverage for whole families. So at this point, at least the worker is covered, but in terms of partners and dependents, I think everybody has to pay in some portion of that. And that is continuing to be an ongoing priority in the budget to make it more sustainable each year. Sabbaticals, I think as you all know, working in a field that is related to trauma, people experience a lot of secondary trauma. People experience their own personal traumas coming up in the work. And having sabbaticals is not something that we've really had the luxury of thinking about. But our agency was able to, get some good notice from a foundation partner who offered us to be part of a pilot project for providing sabbaticals. And of course we said yes, because that's dreamy and amazing. But we were only able to offer that once. So, that long-term advocate that I talked to you about, who's been with us now for almost 20 years, was able to take one 6-month sabbatical. But, I think all of us learned a lot in that time. One, we learned the cost of it. We also learned, what it would take to cover that person. And we also learned, just what it meant to that person to be recognized in that way. most organizations chose their executive director to take that sabbatical. So just want to put that out there too. You know, as a team, we made the decision to pick our person with the most longevity on the team, and that was nobody on management. So just want to put that out there as a values decision. And then API China doesn't have, you know, a full retirement package for our team either. We have we have a plan for 401k, what is it, Diane? 403Bs, something like that, where the agency pays in a percentage and individuals can choose to contribute more. I think, Diane, did you want to say anything there? Okay. At the bottom of that last slide, I did put in, you know, just a note about staff leadership that is value-centered, board leadership that is value-centered. I think that has made a really big difference in our journey. Of course, the staff were primarily frontline workers. We're all about increases, and you know, and we're kind of loudly championing that. It makes a huge difference to have board leadership that is aligned, that the workers that, you know, we have need to be compensated well, so that we can have, you know, a really strong movement that understands survivors, that gets, you know, the lay of the land, that isn't always just fresh new social workers every year. So yeah, for us, you know, when I came into my role, our board leadership was mixed, but everyone on our board was making a living wage. So just want to throw that out there. A lot of times, you know, there's a class difference that can happen between board members and frontline staff. And I think that's the place to engage with boards around, you know, this is a value that we have as an agency around equity, around valuing everyone's labor, around valuing everyone's ability to care for their family. And I think, you know, people have pointed to that tension around, sometimes folks make this assumption that if you're going to work for a nonprofit, you're going to mostly be volunteering your time and then getting paid a little bit. But I think we've gone too far. You know, we've come too far, we've gone too far. We need to do better at this point. And so as I was recruiting board members, that was also part of my priority, was to make sure that folks that were coming on as new board members shared the value that we need to, you know, we need to make sure that our staff have a good experience at our agency, and that they're well compensated.
Joe, I was kind of wondering about maybe doing the next slide and then taking a break. Does that sound okay?
Great. So I think, you know, sometimes when we're looking at this question of how to advance equity in our organizations and living wages in our organizations, one of the barriers that can come up, and I think I saw this on the Jamboard, was that funders won't want to do it, or government partners won't want to do it, and that's where our money is coming from. And I also had that fear when I was going into this change, but what I found was the opposite, actually. So I wanted to be able to lift that up. Most of our funding partners have living wages themselves and are part of organizations that value living wages. And so, you know, I did have some conversations with our partners in that first year to say, hey, you know, what would happen if I submitted a budget to you where there's less staffing and we will do less, but our staff will be compensated better? And everyone said, go for it. That sounds great. And didn't get any pushback from any funder. So, you know, API Chaya has money coming in from the city, from the county, from the state, from foundations. And I think, you know, the biggest pushback that I got was from our board. So just want to lift that up. Sometimes there's so much fear of this change, right? But a lot of funders might be more on board than you think. And then, you know, as we were working, we wanted to talk about talk to our staff about what do they want next. So the first year we did that wage increase, and we made this commitment that we would continue to keep up with wage increases. But then, there were other benefits that we didn't offer yet. And so, we would do kind of a poll each year with the team to ask them, hey, what do you need next? This is kind of, this is where the self-care money came in. This is where, folks were saying, it would make a big difference if the organization valued, just me being able to spend a few dollars on the things I need to be healthy. So we found a package for that. Folks wanted a package to make childcare expenses more affordable. So our insurance vendor worked with us to find, a package that helped families be able to do like pre-tax contributions to their childcare and to their health care. And then, the continued leadership on the values of the organization. And part of what happened with our team is that, more people on our team didn't have children than did. So, for some of the polls that came back, we would see things like more people want gym memberships than healthcare for dependents. But, I think as leaders and managers, part of what we had to do was kind of sit with that and think about that as an equity issue, right? Because we can see the paychecks for everybody. And, I could see every 2 weeks that our folks who have kids on our insurance plan were just getting paid a lot less because they were putting their kids on insurance and needing to put hundreds of dollars into that every month. And so as a pay equity issue, we addressed that instead of gym memberships that year, even though the staff voted differently. But I think in the end, everyone understood. We've been able to kind of lead with values. I think this is our break time.
Yes, I think it'd be a good time, to take a break. Maybe we could come back at 12:05 or in like about 6 minutes or so.
Great. So thank you everyone for being with us so far. It's a lot of information to take in, and feel free to stretch, grab some water, jam out to some music, enjoy yourself for a minute, and we'll be right back.
So welcome folks back. Then the next thing we were going to do is just make some space for like questions and comments. And I do see some in the Jamboard already. I also got the chance to read some more chat in the chat, and it looks like, there are some other people that are looking at this, which I think is really exciting. Catherine in the chat talked about increasing salaries for pretty much everybody, and even more than 25% for some folks. That will be happening next month. So that's really exciting. I think that there's other folks that, are trying different things. And then, I wanted to highlight that. Joanne, one question I saw in here that I actually don't know the answer to is, if we have like a staff differential, if we pay staff more who have language capacity at API Chaya, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
So one of the things that's built into our scale was $1,000 bump for folks who use their bilingual skills within the agency, and like more or less on a daily basis was kind of what we were thinking. So as a culturally specific agency, we have advocates who speak in, speak bilingually every day. So those are the folks who get more of the kind of language compensation for their work. I have heard advocates, saying that it should be compensated more. So just putting that out there, of course, that is less than what you would pay for an interpreter. But as, part of what has happened with API Chaya is that, as the wages have gotten better, it's also become kind of a magnet agency for folks in our region as they're thinking about wages or wanting to enter our field, that folks have looked at our agency as a place to call home. I do think it is really exciting to hear other people's stories of the work that they're doing in their areas. I think one of the things that I found was that it's scariest to talk to other executive directors because, many of us are people who love to succeed, who love to be good at what we do. And and it can be challenging to kind of point out this area where everyone is struggling and to come up with solutions together. A lot of people kind of simply feel like it can't be done. It can be really difficult to engage in the conversation. In the chat, I did see some questions too about education and training. One of the priorities that the agency made was to make sure each staff person has a training budget so that each person at the beginning of their work year can think about, what are the workshops that I want to go to? How does it fit into my work and my learning goals? And there's kind of a mix of dollars between the dollars you can use that are directly related to your work, and then some that are, could be more of a gray area. I see Sarah saying that her nonprofit started a union. That's amazing. There were some workers at API Chaya who thought about unionizing in my time there. I think, unions were created oftentimes when, managers were not willing to create living wage jobs and living wage opportunities for their workers. And it's great when workers really demand and get what they deserve.
Is it okay if I cut and jump? I was noticing some people asking about the way that Joanne was thinking about defining living wage was really looking at what's sustainable for a single parent with 2 kids. So that was kind of the number that we were looking at. And there was another question on the Jamboard about, do you see coalitions wanting to advocate for this on behalf of direct workers? And, I think what I hear is, I really resonate with what Joanne's saying about actually talking to other EDs has been more difficult than talking to funding folks and other people. I think that it just feels so heartsy for people. And of course we want to be doing this. And I think that another question that I saw in here is how do I initiate the question with even other leadership? And I think that it really is this thing about what are our values? How are we walking? How are we actually saying how are we acting on what we believe is right and true, right? And what are some action steps for that? So I don't think that there's the people that you're working with the best and the people you all need to convince better than we do. But I'm curious, Joanne, did you ever find a kind of jumping off point that was helpful, or with those more difficult board conversations, how did you kind of initiate it?
I think my leadership style is also, it's very one-on-one and then move towards consensus. So, with the people who I was afraid might not be ready for this change, I did spend a lot of one-on-one time with them as a new executive leader, just getting to know my board and helping them to understand, the individual stories, right? What does it mean for our longtime advocate to have to work 2 jobs in order to secure her future? I think, people want to do the right thing who are in this line of work oftentimes. And, I think it's kind of up to EDs and management and staff to have it as part of the initial budget conversation. So that's, that's a habit that we created, was every fall, we just talk with the board around, what are your top 3 things that you want? And I would talk with my staff about what are the top 3 things that you want. And most times staff was looking at compensation. And most of the time the board is looking at, do we need a balanced budget? Do we need a budget that puts something into reserves? And then between the 2 of them, right, I would go into the budget process thinking about those priorities. I do see this question about, are you going to share resources on how to create a wage scale? I'm happy to do that. The last slide has my contact information and Diane's contact information if there are folks who want that resource. I really just made a big Excel grid. We had just 4 levels of folks in our team, executive leadership, managers, frontline workers, and then our admin team. And then we set up the scale. So I think from that point, that $58,000 for an advocate, we went up 10% for the managers, and then from that point, another 10% up for the directors, and then we 10% down for our admin. And so it was really just a big math puzzle. I am seeing, I do want to lift up, the next directors. We have a co-director team at API Chaya now, and they have different challenges to resolve. They have the challenge of how do we sustain the scale because more people are staying longer. When I was there, most people didn't last more than 7 years. And we're seeing people who, believe that they could be there for 10 plus years, maybe 20 years, because it's becoming a great place to work. So yeah, I think the sustainability piece is going to be interesting and it'll be a challenge. I see kind of a lot of questions in there around, how do I talk about this? So thank you, Diane, for this slide. It does take, the work of many to make this happen. So we're curious, who do you believe are your allies in this effort? And you can share it on the Jamboard, or if it's something that you want to write in your own notebook, that would be great. But we'd love to hear your responses.
And I guess, just with a lot of these questions, like I think it's nobody can do this on your own. You really do need support. And I think especially if you're in a position, I saw a couple of questions around like, what about retaliation? What about people being, kind of coming for you around pushing for these things, funders straight up denying that it's even a problem. I think it really is about like relationships and being able to have people just be able to be really engaged with you. I think what Joanne shared about like, we had an advocate that had been working here for a really long time that in order to support their family, they had to work another job. And that's not the world that we're fighting for, right? Is that somebody's working 80 hours a week so that they can pay for the cost of their life. And I think just really kind of laying it out there for people. And I think that sometimes you can't lay it out there with people until you have a relationship with them, right? So, this isn't the kind of thing that's like, tomorrow kind of busting in and saying like, this is what's going to happen, right? It's more of a marathon than a sprint. And I think that the first step in this is really figuring out like who can you bring in to be on your team about this? Like who can you rely on? Who can you talk about and brainstorm with? And I think it really requires a lot of people. And I think often it cannot be the priority of other folks. Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of just frustration and sadness coming up, and I want to honor that. This for folks who are working on the front line and who are not getting compensated and who don't see leadership supporting them. It's really painful, and just really want to honor that. And I hear the conversation happening in the chat too, that there are folks who have made efforts and have been denied, and it's painful. It's really painful. One of the things that Diane and I were chatting about was, oftentimes our nonprofit agencies, all of our nonprofit agencies need boards, right? And are constantly recruiting for board members. And I think if you are feeling like, wow, I'm so undervalued where I am, I want you to find another colleague at a sister organization and ask each other to be board members for each other's organization. Because if you can have an ally on your board who understands what it means to be a frontline worker, who has this as a core value, I think that can really help move the needle. And if you can also kind of be from that place of like, I know what it's like, to becoming a board member, to being like, okay, well, now I need to know what this is like. What are the challenges here? What are we trying to solve here? And get, some good management training, get some board training, and then be able to bring your ideas at that level. It makes such a huge difference for that team that you would be leading. Folks in this chat are my new allies, TBH. That's very sweet. I'm hearing, folks asking for us to stay connected, and I'm counting on Ashley to maybe help us with that. Ashley, do you want to pipe in?
I think the other thing I was thinking about, and this I'm reminded of, at API Chaya, we've had a lot of work around thinking about like transformative justice. And I think sometimes it's difficult for advocates who have been, also just constantly working in the criminal legal system, going with people to courts and things like that. And we've been talking about also just like, how do we have these conversations about new topics and also recognize the work that everybody is currently doing, and I wonder about something like with this, it's like, we kind of have to first recognize like where people are coming from and how much work they're already putting into it. And I think that's like a conversation to be had with leadership too, like how can we really be like honoring what we're advocating for our survivors and making sure that the folks that, that you are able to make your life work, I feel like I'm just kind of repeating myself, but I think that there's something about kind of both like recognizing the work people are putting in currently and what they're trying to do. And I think a couple of people have talked about just like having direct, difficult conversations. And I feel like that's so the center of our work, if we could really, and I'll just share, a mentor of mine and I had a conversation about this recently. And the thing that was coming up was like, they were trying to recruit for a job. And I just said to them, I think the salary is too low. I don't think you're going to get the kind of candidates that you're looking for with that salary. And, the person was saying, we actually just bumped all the salaries, like 10 grand. And I was like, I'm sorry, I still think it's too low. And, by the end of the conversation, we were kind of also just talking about, how meaningful it was that we were able to have a conversation with like somebody who, was raised like more middle class, and I was raised more like working poor, working class. And these conversations are not easy and they're so necessary, and I think figuring out like, how do you start them and with who is really important, and not trying to do it alone. Joanne and I have been friends for a long time. And I think that there's something about like, like who is your support system? If you are in leadership, like who's on your team, right? Like who's actually like working with you, but also like, who can you always rely on? Something that I think about is like, I always want somebody in the room who I know knows that I'm good and that I have good intentions, right? And I think that's really important too. Well, we wanted to end actually with folks kind of making a commitment to themselves around like, what's the next step that you're gonna do? What's the next step that you're gonna take? And maybe that's going to be, trying to look into what border leadership at another organization could be like. Maybe that's going to be like solidifying who your allies are, maybe that's going to be reading. I'll give a plug too for the board. I was on our state coalition's board, and I just learned so much in that time around like budgets, and also just the like power of like people coming together, even if it was an unpopular topic. And, you know, if there were three of us, it was so much stronger and compelling to kind of engage. So yes, we won't. I feel like another thing I want to say is, you know, in my last role, I was working on like transformative justice and prevention. And a lot of what my role was supporting like the Black, Indigenous, and, you know, the Black folks, Indigenous folks, and the people of color in the field locally, to just try to keep staying. And I think that there's also a thing about, you know, just figuring out like, does it make sense for me to stay in this role in this organization under this leadership? Like, I think really, really being open to like, what's the best thing for you and for your family, you know, and for sometimes that means not staying, right? So yeah, but what are the next steps that folks are thinking about? Yeah, sharing the permission slip with leadership or board, speaking up, or trying to get a group together. You know, this workshop was not sponsored by a union, but I think, Joanne, we should definitely look into that for next time. I often start workshops too by thinking about like, what's like the most ideal situation, right? What's the best scenario? And I think that's a lot of what our work is with survivors, of like, what do you want at this point, you know? And I wonder about that being a starting place for this conversation as well. Okay.
So I see a lot of email.
Joanne, I think you were muted by accident.
Thank you. I'll use this one. I'm going to have double sound just a second. Okay. So I was saying, you know, on our chat, Ashley gave us one way to stay connected, which is October 27th, Centering Survivors for Transformative Change, exploring economic supports to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence with Freeform, and that there's more information at preventconnect.org. There's lots of emails in this thread, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to save this chat, but you're welcome to email me or email Diane, and maybe we can get a group thread together outside of this, and we'll be able to just stay connected and support each other through, you know, conversations that are going on, and provide additional resources if people are looking for them. And yeah, if there are other questions or thoughts, I'm happy for you all to get a hold of us outside of this program. You know, this is a really difficult topic, and it's a long-term issue that we are looking at. And we really appreciate everybody thinking about it. We really appreciate all of the folks that are working, who are underpaid, who deserve better. We see you, we love you, and we really wish change for you. And if there's anything that anyone wants to share, we'll just watch the chat for a couple moments before we close. Diane, is there anything else that you want to share?
Good job, you all. You're doing great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're muted now, friend. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Go ahead.
Sorry. I don't know. Okay. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. And I, you know, just want to really honor the work that you're doing. You're doing great. And, yeah, reach out to us. We want to hear like good stories too. Catherine, please tell us more. And yeah, keep fighting. Good job.
Well, I want to thank you, Joanne and Deanne, so much for the wisdom, the process, the questions that you've shared with us here today. You obviously have really highlighted a big need for continuing conversation in our work and our field. So thank you both so much for sharing. Thank you all for participating and for also sharing your experiences and your insight. This was such a rich conversation, and it's sad that this means that NSAC is over for the year, but we do hope to be in person with you next year in 2022. NSAC will be held in Washington, D.C., hopefully, fingers crossed, but just all of our gratitude to our Spanish interpreters, to our ASL interpreters, to our closed captioners. I want to thank my colleagues at Valor, Imelda and Sarah. Thank you all so much. We'll leave this chat open for another couple of minutes, but this, I think, will conclude our session. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.